The USS America, one of 3 Kitty Hawk-class supercarriers built for the U.S. Navy in the 1960s, was commissioned in 1965. She spent most of her service in the Atlantic and Mediterranean seas, but participated in the Vietnam War 3 times in the Pacific. She also participated in Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm during the Persian Gulf War. America was the first major aircraft carrier to be used for weapons testing since Operation Crossroads in 1946. Despite massive protests from former crew members who wanted to turn it into a memorial museum, it was scuttled southeast of Cape Hatteras in 2005 after 4 weeks of testing. It was towed to the East Coast, where a secret SINKEX operation finally disposed of the ship. The USS America is the only supercarrier ever sunk intentionally or in combat. Mechanical engineer Blake Horner explained on Quora, "The process took 4 weeks, and eventually it had to be sunk from the side because it wouldn't sink. Not only is it much larger than Wawasutu battleships, it's also much stronger. While it doesn't have the heavy armor of the battleships of the past, it does have a double-layer hull, which means that weapons have to break through alternating layers of steel and voids to get to its interior. It was also much better compartmentalized than battleships. It was so large that many more compartments had to be filled to flood it than a battleship. In addition, thanks to modern technology, most bombs, torpedoes, and missiles have smaller warheads than those used against World War II ships, and the tests actually used guided explosives rather than actual weapons. The main purpose of the tests was to improve the survivability of future aircraft carriers and to study the response of warships to underwater explosions and damage. After 4 weeks of testing, it became clear that the sheer size of the ships would allow them to survive under very difficult conditions. However, the tests were not designed to sink the ship immediately. The naval officers conducting the tests did not intend to shoot to kill, as opposed to an actual attack on enemy battleships, where the goal is to sink them. The aircraft carrier America lasted much longer for 2 reasons. 1, there were no attempts to sink it immediately, although they eventually had to board it to force it to sink. And 2, because of its sheer mass, it was much harder to sink because it could absorb water and damage better than battleships. The original plan was to sell America for scrapping. However, in 2005 it was selected as a platform for live-fire testing and evaluation to aid in the design of future aircraft carriers. Objections were raised to the intentional scrapping of the ship, named for the United States, and a committee of former crew members and other supporters attempted to salvage the ship for use as a museum. Their efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. In a letter to them, Admiral John Nutman, then Vice Chief of Naval Operations, said, "America will make her final and vital contribution to our national defense, this time as a platform for combat testing and evaluation. Its legacy will be the basis for the design of future carriers, ships that will protect the sons, daughters, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of America's veterans. We will conduct a variety of comprehensive tests above and below the waterline, collecting data that naval architects and engineers will use to design the nation's future carrier fleet. It is critical that we maximize the survivability of these ships. At the end of this mission, America will quietly go underwater. I know that America holds a special place in your hearts, not only because of her name, but because of your service aboard her. I ask you to understand why we have chosen this ship for this last important mission, and to recognize the critical importance of her final service. Economically, she had the lowest first-cost ratio of any ship in the Nimitz class, or even her sister ships in the Kitty Hawk class. In the early 1990s, one of the cockpit elevators on the Carrier America even collapsed with an S-3B aircraft. The Carrier also experienced steam and fuel leaks. Also in the early 1990s, while returning from a business trip, an aircraft carrier went through a hurricane that destroyed most of the cockpit catwalks. The America used conventional methods of power supply, so there was no need to worry about nuclear radiation. She was the same size and design as the Nimitz, so there was a lot to learn from her, as if they had sunk one of that class of ships in preparation for the Ford class. There were no plans to use her as a potential reactivation ship, which could be returned to service, or as a museum, as she was in very poor condition compared to her sister ships. As a result, the potential benefits far outweighed the losses, as the lessons learned from her sinking allowed the Navy to improve the Gerald Ford class that was under development. It was simply the logical decision to let the ship serve one last time without having to pay to dismantle her or keep her as a museum.